Okay, we're now joined by a state lawmaker from one of those states where there's still some questions about election integrity. And I'd like to welcome to In the Dugout Representative Frank Ryan from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. Representative Ryan, welcome to In the Dugout.
Mike, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Nice to be on your show.
All right, now, as I explained earlier in the show, I'm wearing my Expos garb because my first major league appearance was against Pittsburgh, which is in your state. I know you're not a Pirates fan. What do you have for me for In the Dugout for your cap?
Well, I'm wearing my USMC hat because Ted Williams, Boston Red Sox extraordinaire, and he and I had very similar batting averages. His was 400, mine was .004, and he's just a great Marine. So in tribute to him, I'm doing that. But I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm a Baltimore Orioles fan.
You know, I love the Orioles and Boog Powell and Brooks Robinson. I used to beat Brooks Robinson all the time when I played wiffle ball. He was one of my heroes with the old Orioles in the 1960s. So anyway, well, you can keep your hat on or take it off. We just want to do that. Now, congratulations. You just got elected to your third term in the Pennsylvania State House, but you do have a Rhode Island connection. Tell us about that.
I actually tell you what I love. I spend a lot of time lecturing for the Rhode Island Society CPA, so I'm in Providence quite a bit. Although since I've been elected, it has not been as frequent, but I was there on a regular basis. I have a lot of good friends.
And then even a military connection.
Well, we do, and I attended, and I'm a graduate of the Marine Corps War College. In Rhode Island, I think you call it the Naval War College, if I remember correctly.
Wow, we're going to have to see how that flies. The Marine Corps War College in Newport. How long did you spend there?
Well, we did two separate summers. I did the summer reserve program, so it was over two separate programs. We did our studies that way, and so I'm a graduate of that reserve officer.
So you have served your country in war. You have served it as a public servant in state. As a state employee, and now you are an elected official. Thank you for your service to our country and to your state of Pennsylvania.
And Mike, thank you for what you're doing here, because this preservation of freedom in our republic and a constitutional republic is important because of it. So thank you for doing it.
Well, and that's what this is all about. I think that's what your group down there and your lawmakers. So just for the record, I did see much of the Thanksgiving Eve hearing of the Joint Committee, Senate, House hearing in your legislature last week. Were you part of that committee, Representative Ryan?
I was, and again, please, Mike, please call me Frank, but I was part of that. And so I've been very active in this entire issue. I'm also a CPA. And so one of the things that happened, process controls are a really important thing for us as a CPA. And we had real serious reservations about how flawed our mail-in process was. So that's why I was invited to be there.
So it obviously wasn't reported on in our media here. I listened to much of the hearings. I watched some, listened to most of it on my Sirius XM radio. But I got to tell you, the testimony seemed stunning to me. Did it come across that way to members of the committee that there were so many severe potential irregularities that it can't be discounted? What were your thoughts overall?
They were, and we had many of those same feelings before. What I was most appreciative of relative to the testimony we heard is how specific it was. Some was more helpful than others. And so, you know, we also had a whole series of follow-up issues. I just finished a fairly elaborate, for lack of a better term, dossier on some of the election irregularities we actually saw at the very specific level. But they gave us a lot of tactical information to use that helped convince me that there were such horrifically fatal flaws in the mail-in ballot process because of the
horrifically fatal flaws.
Absolutely. I would tell you, as a CPA, this is the thrust of the approach that I'm using. As a CPA, we have to be able to rely on the system of internal controls. And that's basically saying, can you reasonably rely on these financial results based upon your financial controls? And I would tell you, under any CPA standard, our election controls were so flawed that you cannot rely on the mail-in ballot votes as accurately representing the outcome of this election.
All right, so there are a lot of patriots throughout the country who feel that way, even Rhode Island, even though Trump supposedly only got 39% of the vote. There's a pretty big presidential Trump following here. But more importantly, people want fair, honest, and accurate elections. So I guess the big question is this. In the near term, with regard to determining our next president, is there, we see reports, some say yes, some, is there anything that your legislative body can do if you determine that the election was fraudulent to change the electoral vote outcome? Is it within your power to do anything?
The only option we have at this point, Mike, is through the legal process in the judicial system. I'm in the process of joining a lawsuit on the very issue I just raised. What we're indicating is that the process flaws were so severe. To answer your other question, we get an awful lot of feedback from people saying that the legislature can appoint the elector.
Right.
And the reality of it is that that's not accurate under Pennsylvania law. And
Can appoint the method of electing the electors, right?
That's correct, because what happened was the way the US Constitution reads is it's very specific, unless it's been prescribed by law. And it was in 1937, it was prescribed that the winner of the popular vote gets the electoral votes. So the question should be, for anyone who really wants to get to reality, is how do we make sure that the popular vote is accurate? And I just made the comment that if you can't rely on the results of the mail-in votes, there are that many flaws. We've got literally almost 500,000, 600,000 ballots that are in question. And these are pretty serious.
How many again? How many ballots?
Between 500,000 to 600,000.
Wow.
Now, I want to caution everybody because, and I will tell you, the vast majority of the Pennsylvania legislators and most of the people in the country feel the way I do on this issue. I want fair, accurate, and transparent election results. If we go through that 500,000 and they all went to Joe Biden and he's declared the winner, then so be it. My personal preference is really immaterial. My preference is for there to be a fair, honest, transparent, and accurate election.
But if you find that there isn't, just to be clear, there is nothing that the legislature on its own can do to change the presumed outcome in Pennsylvania, correct? That's a fact, right? Anybody that says anything different, they're wrong.
That's correct.
Okay.
And there's two reasons for that. One is we prescribed it by law, and we ceased to exist last night.
Oh, your session ended. The last, yeah.
Right. So we're not full. Like I am now. While
Part of the next. Yep.
That's right. While I'm still a representative, technically I'm what's called a representative elect. I'm still a representative because I've already been in office.
Yeah, yeah.
But when I was first elected, I was actually not a representative until the day I was sworn in, which is January 5th. So Pennsylvania Constitution actually doesn't have a legislative body from December 1st until that first Tuesday in January. The reason I bring that up is John Kennedy from CAP, I'm the co-sponsor, I'm the prime sponsor of the bill to do a rewrite of parts of the Pennsylvania Constitution for problems such as we're having today.
For future elections.
That's correct. That's
okay.
correct.
All right. So if Pennsylvania, so anything that would reverse the presumed electoral votes going to Joe Biden, it would have to be initiated by some kind of court decision.
And that's correct. I just sent my entire set of documents to a US congressperson who could then object to the seating of the Pennsylvania delegates, which would then throw it open to the US House of Representatives for that. But it needs one member of the House and one member of the Senate in the Pennsylvania delegation to do that.
The United States delegation?
No, the Pennsylvania delegation.
Yeah, so I mean, but to the United States Congress.
That's correct. So it's got to be one of our 2 senators and one of our 18 members of the House of Representatives.
Would have to sign that resolution.
That's correct. And at that point,
you are a co-sponsor of the much heard about resolution.
I am.
Pennsylvania.
I'm a co-prime sponsor. That's correct.
co-prime sponsor, and the goal of the resolution is
To
what?
say that
I mean, a resolution's not binding, so the goal is,
the goal is to tell our federal legislators that, and to tell our governor that the electors should not be seated. There's enough doubts about the accuracy of the election that we don't believe that it would be fair, accurate, or transparent to seat those electors in light of what we now know.
all right, so one course of action is United States congressional action.
That's correct.
But again, with Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House, that's not going to happen, right?
Actually, I tell you what, it doesn't really have to be, the Pennsylvania electors then would be the ones who would make the decision. And so it could be anywhere from 10 for Joe Biden and 10 for Donald Trump, or it could be any number of things. It doesn't have to always go to the full House of Representatives. There is a circumstance under which it could. If we fail to seat our delegation at all, it could then have to go to Nancy Pelosi. But if that happens, a little known part of the US Constitution, it's not one vote per representative, it's one vote
Right.
per state.
Per delegation, right?
That's correct. And under that case, then Donald Trump would win.
Because there are more Pennsylvania congressmen and women Republicans than there are Democrats, right?
There are more Republican states than there are Democrat states.
Yeah, you know, right. But Pennsylvania itself is also more Republican than Democrat.
50-50,
Oh, it's 50-50.
right down the middle. One senator.
How would your state vote on that?
One senator is a Republican. Actually, he's got deep ties to Rhode Island as well. That's Senator Pat Toomey.
Yes.
Is
Okay.
a
All right. So there is a kind of complicated U.S. congressional course of action, and then there's a legal potential path.
That's correct.
That could declare the election null and void or fraudulent or certain votes fraudulent or whatever. And you are working on a lawsuit for that as well?
I've already prepared the briefing for it, and I've gotten it to the attorneys. We're waiting to see if they accept it. If they accept it, then it gets incorporated into the lawsuit.
Whose attorneys?
The attorneys for the Thomas More Society that have
Okay.
actually filed the suit.
This has nothing to do with the Trump campaign team.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So this would be from the citizens of a group in Pennsylvania suing for a proper integrity outcome here of the election.
That's correct.
And that obviously would eventually, if it were to move, would go up to the US Supreme Court. So presumably what would happen? The US Supreme Court would declare a certain bunch of votes invalid, or would you be petitioning them to actually say who should get the electors?
I've taken the approach, in my practice as a CPA, I specialize in keeping companies out of bankruptcy. So I've been an expert witness in a whole bunch of cases. And so my experience with judges, again, I'm not an attorney, but in my experience with judges, they're looking for very factual information. And if you can prove, from my experience, that the process was so fatally flawed that the results can't be relied on. So here's some of the circumstances in which it would be fatally flawed. The Secretary of State of Pennsylvania gave conflicting guidance to the 67 counties. So there was not equal protection for every
Equal
ballot.
protection, got it.
And that's one. The Supreme Court itself, I've done an impeachment action against one of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court justices, Justice Wecht, because he legislated something into our voting laws that was specifically prohibited by it. So it's under the Separation of Powers Act, he's not permitted to do that. So we're using that as part of the appeal process to the US Supreme Court, saying that basically Justice Wecht made changes to the election law that created this problem. The actual law that we passed was actually a pretty good law. Where it became destroyed was when the Supreme Court changed things and authorized things such as drop boxes.
Yep.
Mail-in ballots could be received up to 3 days afterwards.
Yep.
They were supposed
Without legislative approval.
without legislative. They
Right.
also
And
said
that's the key. That's the key thing there, right?
Well, it is, but the processes became so flawed. So let me give you an example. In Pennsylvania, you were not allowed to check signatures for authentication. But if I voted in person, they
Right.
could check the signature.
Right. Unequal treatment. Right.
And so as a result of that, that could cause, candidly, it could cause every mail-in ballot to be thrown out.
Hmm.
It could cause, that's not likely. It would be more likely that the court could order a revote of the mail-in votes. We know who those people are.
Oh, wow. The ones who, now, do you have to apply for a mail-in ballot in your state, or did you just get one?
You have to apply for one
Proactively?
proactively. And so we know who they are. It's I can tell you
Right,
that.
right.
I've done all the work on it. We've got.
In fact, that was one of the more stunning pieces of testimony. And do you find that true, that I don't know what the number was, but there were X number of actual mail ballot applications received, but yet there was 700,000 or something like that more actual mail ballots counted. Was that accurate?
It was for the period of time that they looked at, but not overall. So the data was very clearly identified in the document that they provided on that Wednesday. Basically, that was a primary number. It was not a general election number.
Oh, okay.
When I did the analytics for the general election, that number is about 350 to 400,000 difference.
But still, more mail ballots being counted by hundreds of thousands than there were applications for mail ballots.
Right. Well, mine's a little bit different. My 400,000 is saying that from 9:47 p.m. on November 2nd, the day before the election, until 8 p.m. on November 4th,
okay,
400,000 more mail-in ballots went out, which conceivably can't happen.
Went out or came in?
Went out.
Went out.
Right.
And then came back some days later, theoretically, or were brought in boxes somewhere. Yeah.
That's actually where
wow.
That's where we're saying we need to get to the bottom of that issue. And then we have a whole series. Let me give an example. There were 200, I believe it was 285 people over the age of 220 that voted. And so they had a birth date of before 1800. And we think they all went for Joe Biden because he knew many of them. And that's my only attempt at humor in this process. But
very good.
Those that don't think it's funny, please accept my apology.
All right.
But,
all right.
So we've got all sorts of issues like that.
All right. I want to review some news articles with you in a second, very quickly, and then we'll conclude. But you know something about elections, right? When you were in, I don't know if it was when you were in the service, but you actually kind of were a monitor or something with Iraq elections, right? And how do you compare what happened in Pennsylvania this year compared to what you saw in Iraq?
I will tell you almost universally, I was called to active duty. And one of my, I'm a retired colonel, and I was called back to active duty to go to Iraq. And I specifically worked on the elections. And I will tell you, we had incredibly detailed controls. We would tell you that the election, despite threats from Al-Qaeda to kill people, we had very, very tight controls over the process. And I believe that those results, and I was one of the few US citizens permitted at the Iraqi polling places that day. And I would tell you that it went off, relatively speaking, without a hitch. And we should be embarrassed that we had such a travesty because of our Supreme Court and our Department of State, our Secretary of State in particular. The Department of State employees are actually pretty good folks. But this thing was such a travesty based upon her decisions.
So the most advanced democracy in the world, most advanced technological countries in the world is shown up by what many consider a third world country in Iraq when it comes to election integrity.
Particularly in light of the fact that it was one of their first free elections in their history. Think about that for a second.
Politics, right? Politics.
It's a sad commentary.
All right, so let me share this with you. And again, I don't want to go into detail because I think you've already answered it. But Rudy Giuliani told you can override the popular vote to appoint pro-Trump electors. What you just told me is that story is false, correct?
This story,
that headline is false.
It's the way the headline is written is inaccurate, but that's actually not what he said in the hearing.
Okay,
What he said in the hearing is that there's a constitutional way for Pennsylvania to be able to do it, whereby if we challenge the accuracy of the election, we can have the electors not seated, which
okay,
would then throw it to the House of
Okay.
Representatives, which would give it to. So they took a whole bunch of
all right.
like going from point A to point F.
Yeah,
and
without
put it-
all the stuff in the middle. Okay,
Right,
got it.
right.
All right, how about this one? Now, so I don't know this media outlet, nlive.com, but they said it was your resolution, the last gasp effort by your Pennsylvania House Republicans has fizzled. Is that true? Has it fizzled?
Again, if you look at the one action, House Resolution 1094, it fizzled to the extent that we ended the session a day later, but we resurrected it this morning. So it's a new change. So again, they didn't tell you the whole story that we went out of session and we're now back in. We are making an application to declare an emergency session to have us seated earlier to do this. And then I'm actively pursuing the lawsuit. So it's looking at one small microscopic aspect of it, and then declaring that to be universally
All
accurate.
right, so in your view, it hasn't fizzled yet.
I'm not as hard as I pulled an all-nighter working on something.
Okay,
I'm
you're
not
not
the kind-
fizzled out yet. Okay.
I'm certainly not the kind of person that's going to pull an all-nighter on something that's already fizzled out.
All right, then over in the court system, this from a couple of days ago, the Pennsylvania upholds a halt to certification, finds likelihood. Now, is that a accurate headline? Is that still valid? We know courts are changing. Again, we can't make sense of what's real and what's not in Pennsylvania. What's going on with this particular lawsuit?
That headline was accurate for about 14 hours. and then the courts intervened and resumed it and dismissed that part of it. And it's called the doctrine of latches. And again, I'm not an attorney, so if there's an attorney out there saying I mispronounced it, please accept my apologies. But it was dismissed without prejudice, saying that they really needed to bring this court case up before the election was done. And now that they're bringing it up, it has the appearance that they only brought it up because it didn't go their way.
Okay.
So as a result of that, but it was accurate at the time, but no longer still there.
Okay. Last few questions, yes or no will be fine, very short. A, based on what you know, what you heard in that hearing, what you know otherwise, was there, you call it a horror story earlier of I forget what the term was. What did Pennsylvania have free and fair and legitimate elections this year, in your view?
We did not.
In your view, will either court actions you're aware of or legislative resolutions or other actions you're aware that could happen, in your view, would you expect that anything would happen quickly enough to potentially reverse what the expected electoral vote distribution?
I'm going to answer that question a little bit different way, if you don't mind, because
Go ahead.
I want to be really fair. As I mentioned to you up front, my personal preference is who I want to become president is immaterial to me as a legislator.
Okay.
I want fair,
All right.
transparent.
Do you think the truth will? All right, let me rephrase it then. Do you think that based on any court actions you're aware of or legislative actions that may happen, that the truth of the elections will come out in time to make a difference either way, to give confidence to or to overturn, whichever way the truth is, whatever the expected electoral process for the state of Pennsylvania is?
I do, and I believe it will have to be, because I
Okay.
think the courts will realize if they don't,
Okay.
no matter what happens, if they don't come in and get resolution to these issues, 50% of the population, no
Yes.
matter what happens, is going to feel disenfranchised.
Yeah.
We will be fighting, no matter who's elected president, we will be fighting this battle for the next 4 years.
And that's my next question. What level of confidence do you have for the more important, larger issue that this will spur a controlled, fair process in Pennsylvania for future elections.
If we don't get a voter ID as a result of this, I will be stunned. Now, the
So you do
governor,
not have voter ID law at any level right now.
well, we did, and it was ruled unconstitutional.
Now, in
And-
our state, we have it, and it's not unconstitutional. Interesting.
And so we are, it hasn't been even attempted now for about, since I've been in the legislature for 4 years, hasn't been attempted. If this doesn't get its voter ID, nothing will. This was a travesty, the way this went down.
Wow.
And the way the Supreme Court and the Secretary of State blew this is beyond me.
All right, so regardless of whether you're a Trump or a Biden fan, I agree, let's not put that political spin on what you're doing. You are after the truth. We cannot have liberty and freedom if we do not know the truth. And ultimately, it's the freedom of the people to choose their elected officials. And you want to know if that truthfully and honestly happened or not, and if that will happen in the future.
Mike,
And right?
I think we have to do that. And
Yes.
we owe it to the entire nation, not just Pennsylvanians, the entire nation, because if this goes wrong, I will tell you then the first time we get if Joe Biden is elected, the first time we get a national mask mandate, there'll be pure bedlam.
Yeah.
If Donald Trump is elected and this hasn't been resolved, and he does something, we'll have the same 4 years of Washington.
Well, we've seen what's going to happen in the streets, so we can't have any more of that.
Right.
All right, Pennsylvania State Representative Frank Ryan, you've been so generous with your time, with your knowledge. Again, thank you for your service to our country and to your state. And would you mind coming back again if something of significance happens in Pennsylvania?
I would absolutely love to. And Mike, this has been a real pleasure. I really appreciate everything you guys have done. And a big shout out to all my friends in Rhode Island. I miss you guys. Can't wait to get back up to Providence and the Newport.
Well, you've got a guy willing to buy your bourbon next time you come up here, all right? Or whatever else you drink.
That's the deal.
All right. Representative Frank Ryan from Pennsylvania, thank you very much for joining me on In the Dugout.